We can find ourselves in golden handcuffs where we're in a cushy, comfortable job, and we're getting paid well. We're comfortable. We're not being challenged. Our brains get lazy. We try to sort of lock ourselves into these spaces, but you are absolutely going to be more fulfilled if you break out of that comfortable thing and find a way to sort of follow this internal compass, even though, yeah, it's hard. And it's hard when society tells you like you're doing what society approves of, but ultimately it's not what you yourself approve of. And that, I think, is a big part of this midlife crisis thing. I think, it's not something that happens to everyone in the middle of their life, but if you aren't living the way that you are proud of, and you've just modeled a life that's sort of good on paper according to society, but doesn't connect to your ideals, then you might have a crisis. And I think that could be a really great thing for you long term if you do have that crisis in that scenario.
Well, Nietzsche comes up quite a bit in your book. You quote him quite a lot. What drew you to Nietzsche, studying Nietzsche?
Yeah, good question. I don't remember exactly when I started reading Nietzsche. I think it was probably early college, but it was clear that there was a lot that resonated with me at that time, and even now. I think Nietzsche is viewed as this sort of immature thinker, and in some ways, as a person, he was sort of immature in a few ways. But I think the idea is, even though you have to read a lot of his work and a lot of secondary work to even figure out what he's trying to say, I think there's a lot that's really valuable there. In many ways called for a return to a virtue ethics type of view that sort of that you saw more in Aristotle and the Stoics, a long time ago, but the world seemed like it was moving away from with utilitarianism, with this idea that we can calculate good that we do in the world. And Nietzsche put the focus on the individual and the mind, really. You have to read a lot to sort of decipher it. But I think one of his main contributions is arguing that there is something to this idea of virtue and of greatness of the individual mind that goes beyond this very simplistic, almost calculated idea of ethics and of what it means to be a good person. So, one of his big issues was with this sort of hedonistic idea that we can measure good in the world by the amount of pleasure or the absence of pain, essentially. And I think, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley really illustrates what Nietzsche was worried about and the world that he was trying to avoid. This world where we're all basically blissed out, where we have no negative emotion, but we're not really aligning with our ideals. The way I look at it, we're not really achieving human greatness. We're just minimizing discomfort. And I think he was really focused on, what does a great individual look like? What does even the ideal individual, if there is such a thing, look like? And there are a few different ways that sort of applies throughout the book. But I think it is really important that we have a vision of what a great, ideal human is, or even at least, what our ideal self is as individuals. So, for example, we talked about winning the lottery. I sort of do an exploration of this in the early chapters of the book, where I say, okay, so you might win the lottery and you might say, okay, well, now I don't have to work. So I'm going to quit this job that a big part of my self-esteem was previously tied up in. I'm going to just kind of sit around now and do whatever I feel like, and kind of adopt this passive, effortless life and spend the money on immediate pleasures. In that case, the lottery is actually going to be a bad thing for you and your well-being, because it's going to decrease the amount that you're exercising your virtues in your life, and your brain is going to notice, so to speak. You're going to cease to admire yourself as much as you did before. On the other hand, you might win the lottery and you might say, oh, this is going to be huge. Now I can quit this mindless job that I had and actually create a new opportunity for me to do a lot more creative, interesting things. I'm going to start this organization. I'm going to become an angel investor. I'm going to, invest this money responsibly so it doesn't go to waste. And in that case, it could result in a much better life for you. So it's not so much, it's not so straightforward that money doesn't buy happiness, for example. It's that all of these circumstantial gains or losses in our lives have an indirect relationship. And really, this is best viewed in this sort of three-dimensional model, because you can be moving, up in the z-axis, that sort of three-dimensional axis, which, I didn't fully flesh out earlier, but essentially you can imagine that chessboard we mentioned turning into a topographical chessboard, where you've now got mountains and valleys on top of the chessboard. And it's really the mountains and valleys that determine what's good for you and what's going to make you happy. So you want to navigate your two-dimensional existence so as to increase that third dimension first and foremost. So maybe taking that job with the higher salary or the greater status really will allow you to climb up that mountain that corresponds to that. But it also might mean creating a new kind of passive comfort that might actually hurt you. It might actually move you down into those valleys of depression and make you less happy, even though something seemingly good happened to you.
Yeah, I have an example from that. I have a friend who sold his business for lots of money, allowed him to retire. So that's a gain, pleasure. It was awesome. Didn't have to work. And for the first couple of months, all he did was like sleep in, because he hadn't done that in a long time. But then after a while, he got depressed. He's like, I got to do something. So he started another business so he could exercise his virtue. Like, he was good at certain things, and he needed an outlet for that.
Yeah, that's a very common story. And I talk about my time in high school and how like summer breaks were kind of like mini retirements in a way. I would get to the end of the school year and be like, oh, I'm so excited. I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to sleep in, play video games all day. And, inevitably I would end up feeling kind of terrible after like 3 weeks and almost be ready to go back to school by the end of the summer. And at one point I kind of realized, okay, I can prevent this from happening. Next summer, I'm going to set big goals and ambitions. I'm going to structure my days so I'm actually doing things that I'm proud of. And I ended up turning those later summers into like some of the best periods of growth in my life, and really satisfying. But ultimately, that idea that, when we finally are able to just stop doing the things that our self-esteem really is built on, that we're going to somehow be thrilled, it often has the opposite effect. So we need to give ourselves reason to admire ourselves, and we don't ever really get to stop. We don't ever get to ride off into the sunset and stop doing this. It's a lifelong process of earning your own admiration. And so there's a lot of really counterintuitive findings about happiness. We do tend to assume that things that make us feel good in the moment, or things that give us that rush, like we've accomplished something, we've gained this new external thing in our lives, we have this tendency to think that's really going to bring the deepest happiness, and we keep sort of navigating our lives that way. And it's really a faulty map for it. I mean, everything we look at, we can see that, like lottery winners, for example, that's like the ultimate achievement that people think would make them so happy if they won the lottery. Well, actually, people who win the lottery very quickly go back down to their original levels of happiness. The same is true of a lot of negative experiences, right? People can, lose their legs and assume their life is over. And then that ends up not being the case at all. They very quickly adapt to their new circumstances. You can look at one study that always stuck out to me, where they showed that lottery winners and paraplegics who had lost their legs, 1 year later, they had pretty much the same levels of happiness, even though something very good happened to one of them and something very bad happened to the other. At least this is
their baseline. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not just that we always return to our baseline, because we can look at people whose well-being has changed dramatically. Some people are in clinical depression for years, and then something changes in their lives or their minds, and then they're way up on a 9 or a 10 on the well-being scale. So it's not that
change. Yeah, you're. Some people might draw the conclusion from the paraplegic or Lado example that we kind of have this set rate of where our well-being can be, but then those are, I guess, examples of lost gain.
when I was in 7th grade, I went into real school. I'd been homeschooled and had a Montessori school and a lot of self-education stuff. So I went into real school for the first time, and it was kind of a shock socially. I realized I wasn't really proud of the person I was at that age. Most people, I imagine, aren't in 7th grade, but I was scared of the world, and I didn't know how to really interact with people. And that led me ultimately to do something crazy for someone like me, who's kind of a chess team type of kid, and join the football team at, 100-pound kid who didn't talk. And I think I did it because I knew I needed to get way out of my comfort zone in order to grow. That was a huge, huge leap out of my comfort zone, but I credit it for a lot of growth and a lot of really what led me to my ideas now.
To do that at that age. Most people never do that.
Yeah, no, I'm amazed at 13 that I had the forethought. I know I couldn't have articulated really why I was doing it, but I just said I need to do this. And then I stayed on the team that whole year, and then 4 more years, and I wasn't ever good at it.
That's funny.
I use the term played loosely, but it caused me to grow in so many ways in terms of my mindset and social skills, everything. So
did you go on to college?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I went into product design. Industrial design was the degree. I was looking into a lot of things. Computer science I was very interested in, obviously psychology, philosophy stuff. But ultimately I decided that's too far on the analytical extreme and not enough creativity. I really thrive on a blend of creativity and analytical. And so I discovered product design and said, this is kind of perfect. This is a lot of creative problem solving. And I still think it really was perfect. I can't imagine a better way to sort of start my venture into this stuff than studying design principles. Worked in that field for a little while, did everything from the 9-to-5 job to consulting and co-founding startups and stuff. Then I decided it's sort of time to take the leap into this space. I had more notes than my note-taking app could even handle without crashing, and I had more than a book's worth of information that I was just kind of ready to get out there. So I took a 60% pay cut at the job I had at the time, went to 2 days a week so that I could spend the other 3 writing this book, Designing the Mind. And that's what kicked it off, published it in 2021, and I've been doing lots more of that ever since, and it's become my full-time thing, essentially.
That idea of who we are, right? It's, again, if it's just left up to the ego and social construct, then we have often a false sense of who we are.
Yeah.
So how do we find out who we really are? And what I mean by that, I don't mean like the one with everything. I mean, like, what is our purpose, and how do we uncover our purpose on this planet, and our reason for being here, reason for existing?
Yeah, so become who you are is actually a phrase that Nietzsche originally said, and he's always nice and cryptic, so it's taken a lot of studying his work to be able to make some sense of that. But what I've sort of found, the more I've studied him, is that he's essentially talking about discovering our deepest, unique personal virtues, and essentially exactly what we're talking about here, learning how to bring them into yourself, into your life. He was really critical of people who treat pleasure and comfort like they're the ultimate end goal in life.
That's the hedonistic approach.
Right, yeah. And this is one of the few areas where Nietzsche and the Stoics and all these thinkers that, and Nietzsche is very critical of pretty much everyone, but where they all converge and essentially say, no, you're aiming for the wrong thing. It's not about comfort and pleasure and hedonism. It's about character and cultivating your personal strengths, even if it's painful and uncomfortable and difficult.